Welcome to Chill Sports History. Thank you for joining us. Whether you're watching closely, listening in the background, settling in for the night, or just looking for a quiet sports story to keep you company, I'm glad you're here. Today we're going back to the early 1990s to the beginning of a brand new NHL franchise, and to one of the most unusual and meaningful preseason games hockey has ever seen. This is the story of Manon Rhéaume, a goalie from Quebec who stepped into the crease for the Tampa Bay Lightning and became the first woman to play in an NHL game. It was a preseason exhibition game. It was only one period. But sometimes, one period is enough to become part of history. And before that night in Tampa, before the cameras and the questions and the attention, Manon Rhéaume was simply a young goalie trying to find a place to play. Manon Rhéaume was born in Quebec in 1972, and her early hockey life had the kind of beginning that feels very familiar in Canadian hockey stories. There was a family rink. There were cold days outside. There were brothers who wanted to shoot the puck. And there was a younger girl who ended up in goal. Her father built a rink in the backyard, and Manon played with her brothers, taking shots and learning the position in the most natural way a young goalie can, by standing there, trying to stop the puck, and then doing it again. Her brother Pascal would later reach the NHL himself, but when Manon was young, none of that was the point yet. Hockey was just part of the family. It was something happening in the yard, on the ice, in the ordinary rhythm of winter. And like a lot of young goalies, she did not begin with some grand plan attached to the position. The crease was simply where she could play. It was where she could be part of the game with her brothers. It was where the action came to her. A goalie learns the sport differently from everyone else. The game arrives in rushes and rebounds, in quick shots and loose pucks, in quiet stretches followed by sudden danger. For Manon, those early years were not about making history. They were about learning how to stay calm while the puck came toward her, over and over again. But even from the beginning, her path was not going to be ordinary. Girls' hockey did not have the same structure or visibility that it has today. There were fewer teams, fewer examples, fewer clear places to go if a girl wanted to keep playing seriously. So for Manon, playing hockey often meant playing with boys. And that meant she was not only learning the position, but also learning how to exist in spaces where people did not always expect her to be. She was not just being judged on whether she could stop the puck. She was being watched because she was different from the other players around her. That becomes one of the quiet themes of her story. At each step, she had to be a goalie, but she also had to carry the weight of being noticed. When she was 11 years old, she became the first girl to play in the Quebec International Pee Wee Hockey Tournament. That tournament had already become one of the famous stages in youth hockey, a place where future NHL players passed through when they were still kids with oversized dreams. For Manon, being there mattered in a different way. She was not a famous name yet. She was not a national figure. She was simply a young player entering a tournament that had not been built with someone like her in mind. And again, the pattern was there. She was trying to play hockey. Other people were trying to decide what her presence meant. That is one of the difficult things about being first. Before there is a pathway, every step feels like it has to be explained. Other players could just be young players. They could have good games and bad games. They could make mistakes and keep moving. But for Manon, even as a kid, the conversation around her was different. When she played well, it could be turned into a statement. When she struggled, it could be turned into one too. She was still learning the game, still growing up, still figuring out who she was as an athlete, while other people attached bigger meaning to almost everything she did. As she got older, the level of competition rose, and the same questions followed her. Could she keep playing? Could she keep up? Would she be allowed to keep moving forward? In 1991, she appeared in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League with the Trois-Rivières Draveurs, becoming the first woman to play in a men's major junior game. That was another important step before Tampa. It meant the Lightning appearance did not come out of nowhere. By the time the NHL world started paying attention, Rhéaume had already spent years stepping into places where she was not expected, and years dealing with the pressure that came with that. The major junior appearance also showed the strange space she occupied. She was good enough to keep getting chances, but those chances often came wrapped in attention that most other players never had to handle. She could not simply be a prospect, or a goalie, or a young athlete trying to find the next level. Her presence became a story before the puck even dropped. That made every opportunity both exciting and heavy. On one hand, it meant people were watching. On the other hand, it meant people were waiting to judge whether she belonged. That pressure was not always clean or simple. There is a way these stories can get flattened over time. Sometimes people turn them into inspirational posters, where every moment seems easy and everyone understands the importance right away. But real barrier-breaking stories are often messier than that. There were doubts. There were people who questioned whether she belonged. There were also people who saw publicity and curiosity before they saw the player. And for Rhéaume, that meant she had to carry two stories at once. She was chasing her own hockey career, but she was also becoming a symbol before she had much chance to decide what that symbol should mean. In 1992, the Tampa Bay Lightning were preparing for their first season in the NHL. They were an expansion team, new to the league, new to their market, and trying to make an impression. Tampa was not a traditional NHL setting. This was not Montreal or Toronto or Detroit or Boston. This was a new hockey team in Florida, trying to introduce itself to fans and to the wider hockey world. Expansion teams need players, but they also need attention. They need people to know they exist. And when Manon Rhéaume came into the picture, there was no pretending that attention was not part of it. The Lightning were led by Phil Esposito, one of hockey's great names, who had helped bring the franchise to Tampa Bay. As a player, Esposito had been a star. As an executive, he was trying to build something from nothing in a place that still had to be convinced that NHL hockey could belong there. The team was new, the market was new, and the franchise needed people talking. That is one of the important balances in this story. The Lightning knew people would notice if a woman came to training camp. They knew reporters would come. They knew it would create conversation around a brand new franchise. Esposito later acknowledged that there was a publicity element to it, but that does not make Rhéaume's part of the story smaller. If anything, it makes it more complicated, because whatever the reason for the invitation, she still had to be the one on the ice. She still had to put on the pads. She still had to face shots. She still had to stand in the crease with everyone watching and wondering what would happen. Publicity could open the door, but it could not make the saves for her. So she went to Lightning camp. And almost immediately, the attention around her became enormous. She was not walking into a quiet tryout where she could blend into the background. She was walking into a situation where cameras and reporters were already waiting. Other players could have a bad practice and just be another player trying to make a roster. Rhéaume did not have that luxury. If she struggled, it would become part of a bigger conversation. Either way, she was not going to be judged only as a goalie. That is a hard thing to imagine, because goaltending already has enough pressure on its own. A goalie is isolated in a way most players are not. When a forward makes a mistake, the play can move on. When a defenseman gets beat, maybe the goalie bails him out. But when a goalie makes a mistake, the red light comes on. Everyone sees it. The scoreboard changes. The building reacts. Now add to that the feeling that an entire hockey world is waiting to decide what your performance says about more than just you. That was the kind of pressure Manon Rhéaume had to carry. And because she was a goalie, there was nowhere to hide. A skater can disappear into the flow of a shift for a moment. A goalie stands alone in the crease. The pads are visible. The mask is visible. The net is behind you, and everyone knows exactly where to look. For Rhéaume, that visibility was even stronger. Every save, every goal, every movement around the crease carried extra meaning because people were watching something they had never seen before in an NHL setting. And then came September 23, 1992. The Tampa Bay Lightning played a preseason game against the St. Louis Blues. It was not a regular season game. It did not count in the standings. No playoff race depended on it. But for Rhéaume, and for hockey history, it mattered. She started the game in goal for Tampa Bay. Across the ice were NHL players, grown men who had spent their lives rising through the sport. In the stands and around the rink were people who understood they were watching something unusual. A woman was standing in an NHL crease. Once the puck dropped, the story became simpler and more intense at the same time. Before the game, there could be discussion about what it meant. After the game, there could be reflection about history. But during the game, the job was the job. Track the puck, set your feet, read the play, stay square, take the shot, recover, get ready for the next one. That is the strange mercy of sports. No matter how much noise surrounds a moment, the actual playing of the game can narrow everything down. For a goalie, the world can become one puck, one shooter, one save, one rebound, one breath. And early in the game, there was no gentle easing in period. The Blues had NHL talent on the ice, and they put pressure on her quickly. A preseason game can sound casual from a distance, but for the players on the ice, especially a goalie trying to prove she belongs, the shots still come hard, the puck still moves fast, the bodies are still big, the angles still close quickly. A goalie does not get to stop and remind everyone that history is being made. She has to read the play and react. Rhéaume faced 9 shots in that first period. 2 of them went in. Jeff Brown scored for St. Louis, and Brendan Shanahan scored as well. Those details matter because the story should not pretend the night was something it was not. This was not a shutout. It was not a perfect period. It was a real period of hockey, with real NHL players, real shots, and real goals against. But the important thing is that the period did not fall apart around her. Tampa scored 2. The game stayed even. And when the first period ended, the score was 2-2. That score is one of the quietest but most important details in the whole story, because it tells you that she got through it. The night did not become a disaster. It did not become a spectacle for the wrong reasons. She played a period against the St. Louis Blues, allowed 2 goals on 9 shots, and left with the game tied. For anyone else, that might have been a small preseason line in a box score. For Manon Rhéaume, it became a permanent line in the history of the sport. There's something very human about that kind of achievement. It was not perfect, and that makes it feel more real. She did not step into the NHL crease and produce a fairy tale shutout. She stepped in, faced the shots, gave up a couple, made enough stops, and finished the period with the game even. In a way, that is more fitting. The moment was not about perfection. It was about presence. She was there. She played. She handled the pressure well enough for the game to keep moving around her. After that period, she had done something no woman had done before in the NHL, and yet, the actual feeling of it was probably not as simple as triumph. There was relief in it. There was a tension. There was maybe uncertainty too. When you are inside a moment like that, you do not always know what it will become. You know what it feels like in your body. You know the nerves, the noise, the shots, the goals, the saves, the end of the period. But you do not always know how people will remember it. That comes later. The Lightning moved on. The preseason moved on. The NHL season began. Tampa Bay started its first year as a franchise, and Rhéaume's one period became one of the first stories attached to the team's identity. The Lightning would go on to build their own history over the decades, with playoff runs, stars, Stanley Cups, and eventually one of the strongest organizations in the league. But at the beginning, before all of that, one of their first lasting NHL moments was Manon Rhéaume standing in goal. The next year, in 1993, she appeared again in one period of a preseason game, this time against the Boston Bruins. That second appearance matters too, because it reminds us that Tampa was not just a single photograph frozen in time. She continued trying to play. She also spent time in men's minor professional leagues, appearing in 24 games across several teams. Again, that part of the story is important because it keeps her from being reduced to one night. The Lightning game is the famous moment, but it was not her entire career. For a lot of athletes who become known for one historic moment, that can be the challenge. The image becomes so powerful that it starts to stand in for the whole person. With Rhéaume, the picture of her in Lightning equipment is still the image many people remember first. But behind that image was a goalie who kept playing, kept training, kept looking for opportunities, and kept trying to build a career in a sport where the doors were not always open. The one period in Tampa was the headline. It was not the whole story. At the same time, Rhéaume was building a serious international career with Team Canada. In 1992, the same year as her Tampa appearance, she helped Canada win gold at the IIHF Women's World Championship. She won another World Championship gold in 1994. Those tournaments were part of the early growth of elite women's hockey, before the sport had the wider stage it would later receive. Then, in 1998, women's hockey was included at the Winter Olympics, and Rhéaume was part of the Canadian team that won silver. That Olympic piece gives her story a wider shape. The NHL preseason game made her famous to many people, but her career was also connected to the development of women's hockey at the international level. She was not only a novelty in a men's game, she was one of the important players in a period when women's hockey was becoming more visible, more organized, and more possible for the girls coming up behind her. The sport still had a long way to go, but the door was opening wider. There is something interesting about the timing of her career. Rhéaume's NHL appearance came before women's hockey had the kind of professional landscape people talk about today. It came before the 1998 Olympic tournament introduced many viewers to women's hockey on that stage. It came before the later generations of stars had the same visibility. So when she stepped into the crease in Tampa, she was doing it in a world where there were far fewer examples for young girls to point to. That is part of why the image lasted. It gave people something they had not seen before. And that kind of image can matter even when the statistics are modest. Sports history is full of achievements that are easy to measure: goals, wins, championships, records, streaks. But some moments matter because they change what people can imagine. Manon Rhéaume's period with the Lightning did not change the NHL overnight. It did not suddenly create a straight path for women into men's professional hockey. It did not erase the barriers around her. But it did put a woman in an NHL net, in a real game setting, wearing the uniform, facing the shots, and taking up space in a place where women had not been seen before. That is why the story is strongest when it is told with balance. It does not need to become bigger than it was. It was a preseason game. She played one period, she allowed 2 goals, she did not become an NHL regular. But it also should not be made smaller than it was. She was 20 years old. She carried enormous attention. She did something unprecedented. And the fact that it came in preseason does not erase the courage it took to stand there. For Rhéaume herself, the meaning of the moment changed with time. That is true for a lot of athletes who become part of history before they fully understand what history will ask of them. In the moment, she was trying to take an opportunity. She was trying not to wonder years later what might have happened if she had said no. She was trying to play. Only later could it become clear that the period in Tampa was not just another preseason period. It was a reference point. The years after her playing career kept her connected to hockey. She worked in development, coaching, and other roles around the game. She helped create opportunities for younger players, especially girls, and stayed connected to the growth of women's hockey. That feels like an important part of the ending, because the story did not stop with her being first. Being first can matter in 2 ways. It can be a headline, something people remember, but it can also become a responsibility, something that turns into mentoring, coaching, building, and helping others step through the door after you. And decades later, her story gained another full circle chapter. In 2026, the Professional Women's Hockey League named Manon Rhéaume the general manager of its Detroit expansion team. By then, women's hockey had changed dramatically from the world she grew up in. There was a major professional league. There were bigger crowds, more visibility, and more young players growing up with examples all around them. And Rhéaume, who had once stood alone in a place where no woman had stood before, was now helping build a new professional team for the next generation. That is a gentle but powerful way to think about her legacy. In 1992, she entered a new NHL team's crease for one period. In 2026, she was helping lead a new women's professional team into its first season. One moment was about opening a door. The other was about helping build a room on the other side of it. Manon Rhéaume's story is not a traditional hockey story. There is no Stanley Cup at the end. There is no overtime goal, no long playoff run, no final buzzer with gloves flying into the air. Instead, it is a story about a goalie who kept finding her way into places where people did not expect her. A backyard rink, boys hockey, a famous Pee Wee tournament, Major Junior, a brand new NHL team, a preseason game in Tampa, Team Canada, the Olympics, and eventually a front office role helping shape the future of the women's game. In that way, the story has its own kind of quiet rhythm. She kept showing up, she kept taking the next chance, she kept standing in the crease. And sometimes, that is what history looks like before it becomes history. Not a grand speech, not a perfect performance. Just someone stepping into a difficult place, doing the job in front of them, and making it easier for someone else to imagine doing the same. On September 23, 1992, Manon Rhéaume played one period for the Tampa Bay Lightning. She faced 9 shots. She allowed 2 goals. The first period ended tied, and when she left the ice, the game continued. But something had already happened that could not be taken back. A woman had played in an NHL game. A young goalie from Quebec had crossed a line that had always been treated as closed, and even if nobody knew exactly what it would mean yet, the image stayed. Years later, it is still there. The white mask, the Lightning sweater, the crease in Tampa, the first period against St. Louis, the young goalie carrying more pressure than most preseason players will ever know. And behind that image is the longer story of how she got there, the backyard rink, the brothers taking shots, the boys' teams, the early barriers, the international medals, and the years spent helping the sport grow after her own playing days. So the story of Manon Rhéaume is not only about being first, it is about what it takes to be first. It is about accepting an opportunity even when people are watching for complicated reasons. It is about playing through the noise. And it is about the way one quiet period in a preseason game can echo for years. Thanks for joining me for this story on Chill Sports History. I hope you enjoyed spending a little time with one of hockey's most unique and meaningful moments. We love sharing these fun stories with you every week. If you'd like to come back for another story, we'd be very happy to have you here, and we can't wait to share more with you.